Hello again. Sorry, I just had to go offline for a minute then and sort something out. I'm recording this, and then I'll upload it so we don't lose drop frames and stuff, because otherwise I don't know when you're getting me and not getting me. We were talking about 7 chords, so I'll just quickly get back down to the 7 chord area. Oh, this is the wrong one again. It's annoying. Okay, just let me quickly reload the correct chords and cadences sheet. There we go. Okay, so we were chatting about seven chords. Okay, and we just talked about kind of diminished and augmented triads. Now, if you're doing film music, diminished and augmented triads are very useful. Okay, if you are, again, we talked about diminished triad. Okay, that's diminished triad, a 3-3, 3 semitone and 3 semitone, minor third on top of a minor third. Augmented triad, major third on top of a major third. Okay, I always have to do that face when I do an augmented. So that's augmented. Now, as soon as you start adding sevenths, you can make chords more interesting. So with a diminished, you can make it a full, what's called a diminished seventh. So a minor third, and then that is a diminished seventh. You'll note a diminished seventh is 9 semitones away from the first note, which is the same, for those of you who look at these things, as a major sixth. So a sixth chord. Okay, that. But because we've got that, okay, mainly because that is a major 7, minor 7, diminished 7. That's like cheesy horror films. Now there's another version of a diminished triad, which is a half diminished, which is a diminished triad with a minor 7, which is a lot more romantic. So when you start adding sevenths, you can make something which is a scary chord, but that wants to move. Yeah, so it wants to move. Okay, so it's straight away that chord has movement to it. That half diminished triad. Whereas that, scary, half diminished, romantic. So you can get there. And if you know these chords, if you want a romantic chord, you know to add that chord in. If you don't, you have to just kind of use a major chord. And a major chord in that point, it's not really romantic, is it? It's just like, hello. It's just a bit dull. Okay? So again, augmented seventh. And then with a major, which makes it more mysterious, and augmented with a minor, which is a bit more clashy. Okay? Now, you could, obviously, as you're aware, you put these chords together, make a chord sequence. We're understanding that a cadence, you must make sure you're using cadences. Okay? Now, you want to make sure that, again, this is like musical punctuation. You want to make sure that the musical punctuation is there. Again, you've got full stops and commas and exclamation marks and things just by using certain chord sequences one after the other. And we've been through that, so I'm not going to go on to that again. But again, start using some of this stuff. You need to know what your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is for the key you're in. And again, if you're going to modulate, if you're going to change key, you need to know what the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for the key you want to go to is. And that'll be a future session where we go through how to modulate. Minor keys. Minor keys are a little bit different, and I'm actually just going to kind of just quickly go through. In a minor key, there are 3 types of minor scales. There's what's called the natural minor, which is basically the key signature version. So we said earlier on that in the previous video that A minor and C major share their key signatures, as in no sharps, no flats. So C major, okay, therefore A minor would start on A. Okay, that's a natural minor, which means it just follows the key signature. there are two other types of minor scale. Okay, there's the harmonic and the melodic. Okay, the harmonic goes up, but then it raises the seventh. So instead of being, it goes. I'll play that again for you. That's the harmonic minor scale. So it raises the seventh. Okay. So if I went. Yeah, so I've got 7 into the octave, a raised seventh. Now that means that if you use the harmonic minor to decide some chords, then it kind of means that in A minor, the G is a G sharp. So you get G sharps into your chords, which creates some of these augmented and diminished triads, okay, in a minor key. Whereas in a major, okay, you don't have any augmenteds. You have one diminished, but you don't have any augmenteds, okay? Whereas in a minor, this one here, because of this whole G sharp raised seventh business, it changes what would be a minor chord 5 into a major chord 5, because the G sharp changes an E, G, B chord, this chord, because of the raised seventh, change it into a minor chord. So if I was going to do a 5-1 from E minor to A minor, which is from chord 5 in minor to minor 5 to minor 1. Okay, that's 5-1. If as soon as I use the harmonic minor, it has a much stronger pull. So if I do my major 5 to 1, okay, that definitely sounds more that it wants to go there. Why? Because that risen seventh wants to fall upwards to its resolve itself to its 1. So you get that. Okay. Like so. Whereas A minor, which sounds okay, but just sounds different and doesn't really quite sound as dramatic and doesn't really quite sound as obvious a move. You can still use some of the chords that are in the natural minor, at which point it's like the opposite pretty much of major. 1, 4, 5 a minor, 3, 6, 7 a major, and 2 is diminished. So you can still use E minor, okay, and obviously things like G major instead of G sharp, okay, G sharp, not G sharp major, that's a typo, it's G sharp diminished. Yeah, and again it says here, most of the time you'll be able to hear which the correct chord to use is. Now, a chord sequence I composed when I was younger was in A minor. Again, not the greatest keyboard player, but I was in A minor, and I went from A minor to there to a F7, and then to E7, to F, to D7, and then, whoopsie daisy, wrong chord, I'll just play it. So it's A minor to F major, G to E minor, F to D minor, G to E major, which leads me back to A. So if I play you that as I composed it. Okay, so there's the use there of both E minor. Okay, but then before I use to when I go to the cadence, it's major 5 into my minor 1. Okay, so using a harmonic minor but also being able to use the other chords means that minor keys can often be a little bit more interesting. Inversions. Inversions, again, is just about what the lowest note in the chord is. Often with me, that's my left hand of the piano. But again, an inversion makes the chord sound less strongly of the chord. So C major sounds less major and less happy and bright, even though it's still got the same note. Because there's, for example, the first inversion of C major sounds a bit more subtle and a bit different, even though the notes are the same. So, for example, C major. That's C major, nice and bright. If I move it into its first inversion, so there's an E on the bottom, the lowest note of the chord is an E. Doesn't matter what the other chords are doing as long as they're C, E, and G, but I can have this. That chord. Right? Now that wants to move somewhere. This chord, that's like a full stop. That just could sit there and it's done. A first inversion kind of wants to go somewhere. It's not finished. I wouldn't want to finish a piece of music on this because it wants to move. Now, often for me, a 1B, so a 1 chord in its first inversion, might want to move upwards to its 4. So there. Okay. Okay, that's like a little chord sequence. So when you invert a chord, it makes it weaker. It weakens the kind of major or minorness of that chord. Okay, so if I do it with, for example, A minor, if I have A minor, okay, if I stick A minor in its first inversion, okay, like so, makes it sound very different. Okay, that chord, it gives it a kind of different vibe. Okay, that, again, it's finished, it's like done. This chord, it has movement. Okay, so that one for me, again, wants to move up. Okay. Wants to move to the 5 chord again. Okay, so as you use inversions, the reason you use inversions is to make chords more interesting, and you can use less chords and make it more interesting by doing inversions and adding sevenths. So you need to kind of be using inversions, using sevenths in your compositions, and again, the sheet, which you should print out, gives you some examples of what you might do with that. Okay. There's then like an example chord sequence, again, how you'd write it out in Roman numerals, how you'd write it out with chord names, and what the notes of the chord are. Okay, obviously using some specific kind of chords there that sounds quite nice. Chord spacing I won't go through in this video. On the last sheet, there's actually some blank chord grids, so you can fill in some chord grids and be doing that. Now I just want to quickly load in a piece I composed a while back. It's a fair few years ago now, actually. At the time, I called it The Night Prince. It was, again, the idea was it was kind of a piece of film music, and it just kind of made me think of something that might be kind of helping some of you out. So I'll just play you a bit and just explain a couple of things with this. You'll see already, volume-wise, it's got a really loud section. So already I kind of want to get some dynamics in it. So it's quite quiet, but then it really kind of kicks off. So I'm just going to kind of have a little play of it and then just give you a little bit of an explain, just to give you a bit of an insight into the kind of things you might want to do. It's very arpeggio-y, okay? It's lots of arpeggios with a melody on top. So it's not overly difficult, but again, it reminds me of some bits and bobs. So yeah, have a listen. obviously it's relatively long. It's you get away with that length actually in a GCSE composition. You can do up to 5 minutes in a GCSE composition. But just to focus on a couple of things, there's a lot of arpeggios. There's a lot of 1 3 5 1, or 1 5 1 3. There's lots of movement. Even the bit where it's get big is just different versions of the same chord. Literally just the same chord. Okay, so there you've got, which is hopefully I can just select this. Get a strange noise. Who knows? So that's basically the arpeggio, the kind of way the arpeggio goes. It goes 1 5 1 5 3 5 1 5, and pretty much follows that pattern. Okay, so when you play it. Okay, so the bass line. That's it. And then okay, so you get that nice little kind of rhythm in the right hand. And that is just the arpeggio. Okay, it's just more interesting to do that, and it has more kind of inherent emotion than just sticking the chord in as it is, rather than this. Which is all it does. Okay, but as soon as you have a more interesting kind of arpeggio, a kind of a set rhythm, it sounds more emotional. Okay. Later on in the piece, it kind of hits, and you get that. So you get that, which is the 5 1 3 to a 3 5 1 to a 1 3 5. So it's literally just the chord played in a descending manner. So you get that. And then Okay, so it's the same 3 notes, but just swapping the order of the chords going downwards, so it sounds dramatic. Okay, and then later on when it gets really dramatic, I just up the octave, so it ends up being up there. Okay, up there. 1 second. Like so. And some of that on Cubase was clicked in, not played in. So the bit where it gets kind of big, I ended up clicking it in, playing it in a couple of kind of things, in a couple of kind of goes. So I didn't play it in live, because probably any of you who know my piano skills know that I wouldn't be able to play that in live. But it has a nice kind of lyric to it. One thing I did was add reverb. Okay, go into Cubase, and on your part there, whoops, so there's on your inserts. Where are they? Yeah, there. You've got inserts, and again, add some reverb. Okay, if you add a reverb, you can make a really kind of nice kind of sound. Okay, really nice kind of sound. Just loading that reverb. You go in. My favorite one is Music Academy, like so, and set that to about 60. Okay, and then the generic kind of keyboard sound, I'll just turn its reverb off, so you get just this idea. With the reverb, it sounds like this. Sounds like it's in a room. If I turn that reverb off, it sounds like the piano's in your head. Now straight away, that's so much less musical, just because it's not in a place. It doesn't sound as natural. Now, if I had this and I upped that to 70, like so, and already you've got that kind of like, ooh, that sounds nice. If you also haven't got a pedal, if you do that little thing of adding release, so if you go into there and add release, and add a little bit of release, when you now do this, it sounds even better. And before you know it, you've got something which sounds musical. And if you listen to the beginning of mine, it kind of does that. Okay, so it's got that kind of tail away and it sounds kind of emotional. Now I'm just going to quickly play a piece. And the reason I actually did this was because I was listening to some stuff by a composer called, and I'll just log it up on here, Max Richter, who does film compositions, and he's really quite popular. And I was listening, interestingly enough, to one of these pieces. I just had it on my computer, and it reminded me of my own composition. And mine was composed before this, so who knows? Maybe he nicked my composition. Probably not. But just have a listen. This is very similar, but just gives you an idea that this kind of stuff, relatively simple kind of stuff, is used by professional composers. And this was for an HBO TV series called The Leftovers. So just have a listen to this. See why I thought it was mine? So yeah, and he's a professional composer, I know. So the reason I'm just kind of going through that isn't to kind of, but yeah, look, 31 million listens on that. Okay, so therefore he is famous. But simple things can work really well. Okay, and on Cubase, you can have a piano part that if you just add a little bit of reverb, add a little bit of sustain, do some interesting things with some arpeggios that are really pretty simple. So when you do your thing on chord pads that we've gone through, sometimes it's like, oh, well, it just doesn't sound very good. But the reason it doesn't sound very good is you've not done anything with the chords. You've not put them in a rhythm, you've not put them in arpeggio, you've not added a melody over the top, you've not added inversions, you maybe haven't added sevenths. There's all these kind of relatively simple things that you could and should be doing. Okay, all these things that are on this chords and cadences sheet, which, as I said, is on Edmodo, ready for you to print out. That yeah, you can really get into that and make sure that you're kind of adding these things, and it's stuff that you can add to compositions you already started and mostly can kind of partly completed, things that you've even maybe finished. You can go in and say, okay, what can I add? Can I add some of these things which make it more interesting? Can I add some of these kind of chords? Can I do some of this? Okay, any of these things that you can do are just going to make your composition better. Again, score more marks, make it a bit more musical. And again, even if what you get through is realizing you've accidentally done some of these things, because often you'll look and think, oh, I like that chord sequence, that's really good. And then you find out that you've actually followed the rules without knowing that you followed the rules. The reason the rules are the rules is they're not the rules. They're just things that generally seem to work. So it's guidelines, okay? Lots of composers spent many, many years, hundreds of years, working out kind of what sounds right to our kind of Western classical ears, okay? And you're used to it, okay? You're used to these kind of sounds. You're used to what happens with this music. So really, really, really kind of get into that chords and cadences sheet, print it out, read through it, make sure that when you're looking at your compositions, you're actually looking at chord sequences, not just as in they sound a bit clunky and naff through the chord pad. That's lovely, but at the same point, that chord sequence could sound amazing if you do the right things with it. Okay, it's not the chord sequence that's at fault, it's the fact that you haven't then done things with it. You've expect just a generic chord sequence on Cubase to kind of solve all your problems. And what you need to do is, you need to think, okay, if I'm in, like my composition was in C minor, if I'm in C minor, what am I going to do? Okay, am I just going to have C minor playing like that? No, of course I'm not, because it's dull. It's just dull, okay? I'm going to have to do something with it. I can either have it in a rhythm. Yeah, so already I'm doing kind of a rhythm, okay? That's C minor into A flat major, into G major, back to C minor, okay? But then that kind of was quite a busy chord sequence. And then at that point, I could have a relatively simple left-hand part again. And like I said, I'm not the world's greatest keyboard player, but if I can manage these things, you can. So if I had this. Now that's all really simple kind of chords, but you're doing relatively musical things with it. Okay? I decided, obviously, in my composition that I was just going to go. So 1 5 1 5 3 5 1 5, and that kind of rhythm, and I kept that for the majority of my piece until I had a different kind of rhythm to make a kind of contrasting section. So I kept the same chord sequence in this case. I didn't modulate, I didn't do anything of these things. There's not really very many sevenths in there. Okay, all I did was choose to have a chord just by having those arpeggios voiced in a different way. Same chords, same notes, but just voiced differently, and it sounds different. It sounds melodic, it sounds interesting, it sounds something like a professional composer would compose, Max Richter. Okay, I'm sure he nicked my composition. I should be a millionaire right now. But yeah, so please make sure you look through these sheets, really kind of dig through it and try and get your head around that stuff and start trying to use some of this stuff. If you've got like a standard 1 chord, add a major 7 to it. You've got a 5 chord, make it a dominant 7th, add a minor 7th to it. You can always go into your chords and you can add these notes, you can add these things after you've already composed something, and really kind of start making sure you're ticking off some boxes of kind of skills. Okay, because if you just give me straight chord pad chords with not much else, then we're going to be capping ourselves. If we've got no rhythms, if you've just got block chords, we're going to be capping ourselves. So yeah, so please make sure that we're looking at this. We've got more tutorials to come. I did say this afternoon to the film music people that I would go through and just kind of cover a couple of things. It's not been generically about film music, but I'll probably do another one again and go more into detail with specifically film music. But again, that piece is only for piano. But again, it sounds kind of film music. It sounds kind of emotional. And again, I composed it as if it was for either kind of like a film. Okay, so a descriptive piece. So yeah, just give things a go. And again, don't just assume that because a chord sequence in a dry piano with no reverb and no sustain sounds a bit rubbish, that it's going to make a rubbish composition. Okay, simple chord sequences can make beautiful compositions. Okay, really beautiful compositions. And again, melody. Okay, the tune on top of something. My chord sequence is nothing particularly special, and the melody's nothing particularly special, but it has something. It kind of, for me, it just kind of works. It's not too problematic, it's not too difficult, but it just has, and even the melody is just like the notes of the chord with a few notes in between. Okay, so I'm going to sign off there because we're at 10:30. I've probably got to get some sleep at some point. And yeah, so just give it a go, and again, send me some messages on Edmodo, upload your progress in Edmodo, let me hear some of your work, and I can give you some feedback and tell you what you might want to look at. If you can upload Cubase project files, that would be great as well, because I can upload them and actually see all the notes and see the chords and maybe tell you some places where you might be able to fit some of these things in. So yeah, just give it a go, and I'll see you soon. Well, tomorrow, I think. Okay, bye. Night night.